have a plan, do your homework, and then have a backup plan, and then have a backup plan of the backup plan.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Traveling to Latin America and using Miami as a hub is a topic that doesn't just apply to US operators, but operators throughout the world. I'm here with Sean West live at the International Security Expo, and we're going to look at this topic a little bit later with Joe Gehr, CEO of Technon LLC, great friend of the industry, and this topic really transcends geographies to a more precise instruction on how to operate in Miami, how to look for work, and why maybe in this current climate that's a good thing. Sean, what do you think we can learn today from this topic?
I'm looking forward to hearing from Joe. It's always good to hear from subject matter experts in different locales. I don't have a great experience of working in Latin America, so it'd be good to learn from someone such as Joe, who has a lot of experience in operating out there, with all the pitfalls and what you can expect. So yeah, it'd be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, because I mean, it is good when we bring on a guest and we say, here's an expose on this geography, like we did with Hilda looking at West Africa. But I think this has something that connects the dots. You know, I'm acutely aware that, you know, alongside the International Security Expo in London, there was the GSX in Orlando. So a big shout out to anyone out there that attended that event. Obviously, travel is a bit restricted still, but you know, anyone that made it to that event, great news. I know there was a great EP mix as well. In terms of the event itself, it's been a pleasure to walk around, see some of the exhibitors, and I think people are just genuinely happy to be back and to see each other. Some interesting talks.
It's interesting that I do enjoy attending these expos, and you know, for many years we exhibited there as the BP and the Circuit Magazine. At this event we didn't, so it was nice to not have the anger of being back to a stand and actually to get out, network with people, visit different stands, see what's on offer. So anyone who hasn't been to these events, I think, you know, there's a lot to take away there by visiting them. But I think when you attend them, you have to have a plan, because you can go there, they're so big and vast, so many providers, people. If you go there, you can get swept away if you leave without a plan. So think of something you're looking to purchase, some companies you're looking to meet. You can get the event guide when you go through the door, and have a plan when you're walking around, and so when you arrive, you can leave and take something away with you.
Indeed, plan, which in a way is a big flavour of today's interview. Joe Gehr is a big planner, and his message, I think you'll see, comes out loud and clear. Plan before you go to LatAm. Maybe I've just coined that phrase, plan before LatAm. I don't know. But what we do know is that the Miami corridor is a useful and important stop-off point for our community. So let's hear it. Joe Gehr, CEO of Technon and big friend of the industry, talking about that amazing corridor.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit Magazine.
The Miami LatAm corridor, very important string to the protector's bow, not just in the United States, but around the world. Today, we're very honored to be meeting with Joe Gehr, CEO of Technon, and together, John Moss and myself, we're going to explore this corridor, what it means, and some tips and tricks, especially when operating in the LatAm region. Joe, it's a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Pleasure to see you, and thank you again for having me in one of your great programs.
My pleasure. Well, obviously, with the Circuit Magazine podcast, we do things often thematically. So this theme of LatAm Miami as a corridor, can you give us a bit of a flavor of what we're trying to achieve by shining a light on this? What should people better understand?
Okay, so I think we should start from the basics, right? So what is LatAm, right? So LatAm stands for Latin America, and that means a little more than South America. That includes Central America, it includes Mexico, the Caribbean, etc. So all in all, it's a little more than 20 countries or territories. And then that brings, each of those bring their own flavor to them, right? So it's different demographics. So one of the things, Phelim, that we're talking offline is that, LatAm is a region, right? But you should be doing this for every other part of the world you're going to go visit, right? So I like to call it the macro to micro approach in my organization. And so we have to understand, like the little Google Earth that moves around and shows you a region of the world, and you start zooming in to a continent, and then you zoom in to a country, to a city, to a neighborhood, to a location, for example. And then as you do that, you should be learning around as much as you can about those regions, right? Or as relevant information about that. So again, LATAM is more than 20 countries. Demographics, you have a very rich mixture of whites, blacks, Asians, mestizos, mulattoes. It's multi-ethnic. It's fascinating. Countries, you have huge countries like Brazil, for example, with over 200 million in population, Mexico, 125 million more or less, Colombia, 50 million, Argentina, all the way down to countries like Uruguay or Puerto Rico, which is actually part of LATAM too, with 3 million, or Uruguay with 3.3, or Costa Rica, right? Languages, of course, Spanish is in the vast majority, but you also have hubs of, for example, a very important one of Portuguese in Brazil, or you have French in Haiti and the Guyana, or Dutch in the Caribbean, right? So Aruba, Curacao, Suriname, etc. Different religions. Yeah. Politics. So again, here it starts getting interesting in terms of our listeners or viewers, politics, right? So most of the countries have democracies. Venezuela, for example, has an authoritarian regime right now there for the last years. And then, you start getting into problems like political instability, institutional weakness, of course, insecurity, crime, drug trafficking, some of these places. Through some of the areas of the region, poverty, social inequality. And this brings a whole host of problems that you can get, right? And then you can also, of course, understand, the regions also in terms of, for example, natural disasters, right? So if you're going with the principle to a place like Mexico, for example, this should be part of your plan because it happens quite often, like in some areas of California. So, and overall, this is like the introduction to LATAM, and of course, there's a ton of different sources that you can go and visit and get really good information about it.
And what about you? Your passion, your backstory, your drive to combine that wonderful Miami, South Florida, and LATAM region. Can you give us a flavor of where you're coming from?
Sure. So you mean so being in Miami, of course, like we're talking offline as well, you're really in the gateway between the US or actually even other parts of the world that we're talking with John, like Europe, UK. You typically get to LATAM or to South America through the Miami hub. So it's a great hub. We were joking offline that Miami is sometimes considered the capital of LATAM. And so for a security professional, stopping in Miami or having the right contacts in Miami when you're going to go and take a principal down to one of the countries in Latin America is very beneficial, right? Because most likely you'll have, if you're going to Brazil, to give you an example, you can definitely hook up with some really good guys in Miami that know the security / EP space in Brazil, right? Same thing with all the other countries. So that's a really good start, right? You get the best of all worlds in Miami as you start preparing and doing your advanced preparations for a trip.
And what about you? Tell us a bit about you and your background.
So my background in the crucible of these two topics we're talking about involves having been born in Latin America, in Colombia. I was born there. I grew up in the 80s. Being a teenager in the 80s, I had to experience firsthand the scenes that are now made very famous by Netflix series like Narcos, and that whole time in history, we had all these problems with drug dealing cartels and the wars between them. That was a very difficult, and I dare to say eye-opening and security awareness enhancing place to be living in at those times. Because if you're not aware, you could end up at the wrong place in the wrong time, and like many others, and be in one of those shootings, bombings, you name it, right? And then of course the whole adversarial mindset that comes with that, right? So you start, even as a teenager, when you're going out with friends, the shopping center, you start being very wary of who's looking at you, why are they looking at you. You start understanding what suspicious activity means. And so all these things in my personal story had probably a very important role in my background and in my story, right? From there, then I moved to Israel, and I end up having a great decade there, working in the fields of security and intelligence. Fascinating work, fascinating also times in history. Go into different details there, but not relevant to this conversation. And then in 2004, post 9/11, I basically got down to Miami, and I've been there since. So 17 years, very interesting times also post 9/11 with all the changes, structurally that happened in the US in those days, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the TSA, all the lessons learned, all the different approaches that were tried, and then we had the whole time, the whole epoch of active shooter incidents, right? In schools, in movie theaters, so anyway, that's in a nutshell, a summary of my touching points with this field, and how that has somehow shaped what we call today in Technon our proactive security approach, right?
Joe, it's a great place to jump in, actually. So, first of all, great introduction. And I can definitely see from the background why you moved into security and protective services. It's absolutely no question that this was a really good field for you. But I just wanted to jump in at this point, because, whenever we travel to a different zone, different areas, something we're not familiar with, there's a lot of procedures. And this is kind of the process that you're talking about now, in going from this bigger picture and getting more zoomed in. And there's a lot of things, obviously, that we can overlay in terms of procedures, routines, techniques, and so on, that will, fit into any of those different situations and scenarios. But what I'd really like to get from you at this point is anything specific to LatAm. And I know, like you said, made us very aware that's comprising 20 countries, and it's quite diverse, it's quite rich. But and maybe let's start with more kind of closer to Central America, moving down, because that might be the first port of call for a lot of people who are accompanied, high net worths, business travel, and so on. What are the more, being more granular and more specific about this corridor? What are the things that are more unique in terms of threats, cultural sensitivities, things like this?
Yeah, so again, it's a huge area, right? It's a huge region. Each of those places has its own set of possible problems, right? Risks, etc. So, in general, I think you should know that it's important. Planning is critical, which is, again, relevant to everything else that we should be doing. But in LatAm specifically, because of the overall environment and the culture as well, again, in some of these countries, we talk about a high degree of corruption, for example, right? So that can manifest in a ton of different problematic ways for someone trying to protect the principal there, right? From the guy in the hotel passing out information about who's staying there and about, where, when, information that is critical, right? And sensitive to, anyway, so things. So I think my golden regional tip would be pretty much have a plan, do your homework, and then have a backup plan, and then have a backup plan of the backup plan, you know? So especially in those places where you have a lot of high corruption and you don't know who you can trust and who you cannot trust. So yeah, again, if you can go down there and do some advanced work, that's amazing. That'll be the best. Hire have a combination of your regular team with local parties, vetted partners that you can work with over there that know the region, know the problems, know the ways around them, know the language, know the culture, right? So that's I think very important, and that's again a place where in Miami you can get to know some of these people that are nationals, right?
What if we went country to country? Because there are some countries that are very small, perhaps people don't often travel to, Curacao, or maybe they do, I don't know. But then maybe there's somewhere like Colombia. Is there something special that people should think about when operating in Colombia, for example?
Sure. If you ask the U.S. Secret Service, for example, you had a very famous case. We were talking about that not too long ago with a colleague here, where the Secret Service was pretty much got in trouble because of the beauty of the Colombian women, right? So they were in Cartagena. I don't know if you remember that incident, which was actually it ended up being a diplomatic incident, right? Where instead of doing their job, they were again killed by the looks of the beautiful Colombian women, and they got in trouble, and there was a problem there, and that ended up being not only not very professional, not professional at all, but also it was a big embarrassment, and people got fired because of that. So it all depends. It's really depending on who you're bringing, who's the principal. Are you alone? Where are you going? I can tell you, for example, in Mexico today, there's a lot of, the same type of problems we had in Colombia in the 80s. That has, because of the DEA and Colombian work in that area throughout the years, that kind of like shifted towards Mexico now. So now you have over there problems like all these express kidnappings, a lot of unemployed former sicarios that know the tactics, and then they go out and start extorting people, kidnapping people. And so knowing that, you understand that you're dealing with potentially a pretty sophisticated adversary. Again, it all depends who you're with, how public that person is, right? So if you're working with a very low-key individual or family, then that's probably the safest in some of these places. If you're moving around with a person that is public and people identify him or her or them, then it's of course much of a challenge. Chile, for example, beautiful place. Santiago is fabulous, right? You have snow, you have the ocean not too far away, like they like to say. But then you have the anarchist groups, for example, over there. And so again, you have to understand the internal conflicts and problems of these places so that you're not caught in the middle of that, right? And then hopefully have, again, local resources that can help you, mitigate those incidents and understand, what to do when that happens, right? One of those local resources, for example, for people flying in from the US, a lot of times I've found it very useful to talk to the US Embassy CSOs, right? The chief security officers. They can give you a short briefing. You can do that over the phone. You can do that in person if you go there and you create that relationship. And then of course the private sector locally, right? Which again, you can meet a lot of these folks in Miami. So it's always a good thing to be, visiting Miami before you go down there to LatAm and start planning and start vetting these companies.
So Joe, you're in my mind, you're painting a picture of Miami a bit akin to the cantina in Mos Eisley and Star Wars. As a reference for anybody of a certain age. And you were speaking about the advance earlier, and obviously, advance is always a luxury. Well, not always, but can be a luxury. Is always something we're going to want to do, and especially if we're going into the unknown. So thinking about using Miami as our first port of call, what's the type of work that we can be doing in Miami in preparation? What can we do in Miami?
So again, even before you leave your place of origin, right? Go into Google, suck up as much information as you can about, your destiny or your target neighborhood, even, right? Country, city,
Or ask Joe,
etc.
or ask Joe.
Or ask, and then when you're in Miami or before you get there, right? Ask the locals. Absolutely, you can definitely call me. I'll be very happy. We've helped. We have a lot of very good, great partners in some of these challenging places: Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Colombia, of course, right? So definitely we can. We'll be very happy to hook you up with very good people that can help you make all that much more smoother and again, understanding the local problems and the ways to mitigate them and to prevent them.
And in terms of interaction, are there any takeaways there? Anything we should be thinking about on a cultural level? Just human interactions.
Yeah, I think I dare to say in general, the LatAm national is typically a very warm person. Mannerisms like saying good morning, thank you, please are very important for the cultural landscape here, right? If you go somewhere and you're rude and you think you're the king of the world, then it's not going to be good for you, right? If you're humble and you speak, in a way that you're giving respect to the other person. Again, it's basics, but in Latin America, it's certainly something very important. People love, from my experience, people love foreigners. And so if you spend a little time telling them where you're from, what you're doing, of course, without revealing any type of, OPSEC details, you can actually, maybe start getting friendly with a few people, maybe even recruiting them as what we call, some other time we can talk about that. We talk about force multipliers all the time, right? And so the guy in the hotel, the guy in the restaurant, the guy in the airport, right? That you get to know because you're going there maybe several times, or even that first time, right? If you're super nice and, they can actually help you a lot, right? You can sit down with them, tell them in general, what you're concerned about. And again, they're local. Remember that in security, we always talk about knowing what is normal, right? So as a foreigner coming into a place, if you didn't have the luxury, like you're saying, of going there, a few days before that, or, even more, you really don't know what is normal. And so if you don't know what the normal is, you're not going to be able to understand the irregularities that easily, right? But the locals will. And so spending some time with the locals is, in my opinion, always very interesting. First of all, genuinely, right? You learn about the place like that. And then, those same locals can help you understand your potential vulnerabilities better, and may even give you a lending hand when something happens, right?
Yeah, and as native English speakers, often we're not very good on the language front. How would we get on in Latin America working without knowing much of the language?
That's a great point. So typically, if you're working in EP and you're going with the principal, you're typically staying in one of the international known and good hotels, right? And then for sure you're going to have the concierge, you're going to have the front desk personnel well versed in English. So definitely, again, go talk to them, find someone that you can have those conversations with, so you understand your environment better. And then if you're going to be moving around, of course, but again, this is all basics, right? So who are you going to be? Remember, the movement from point A to point B is always critical in these type of security operations, right? So hopefully you have a trusted and vetted driver, right, with experience that knows the language that you can communicate with. And again, a lot of these companies that are local, that have been doing this type of work for foreign nationals, have all these types of drivers, that are security drivers and have great English, etc. And then I would also, like we said, have a backup to the backup, right? So listen, the basics, right? How do I say, whatever top 10 phrases you want to know how to say, right? Where's the nearest hospital? But again, you should know where the nearest hospital is anyway, right? But yeah, so have your address, have something where you can. I remember one time in China, I was moving around in a taxi. Good luck with that, right? So, here's a little business card that you got from someone who spoke English in the hotel, and that's how you move around. And if you lose that, you're toast, right? How are you gonna get back to your coordinates? So yeah, think of all those things, and always have in advance the potential problems you may have, and have a plan for those problems, including, of course, language. Also, for these places, it's really important and there's a ton of companies that can help you with that, from very expensive to very inexpensive. Try to get local real-time information of what's happening in your neighborhood, in your city, right? Because it's very unlikely that you may have, for example, this week in Colombia, we had a few, there's some issue with some of the bus companies, and they just randomly started blocking roads, right? So if you're going from point A to point B and you only know this route, but again, your local vetted security drivers should already know that, but these are things that you should be thinking about as well, because these things happen in Latin America
and in the UK as well. If you've been in the UK for the last couple of weeks, you've probably had quite a lot of preparation with blockades and running out of commodities and so on.
No, I thought of a useful thing for our listeners. So our listeners, let's say they're a solo practitioner, right? We have listeners, they're not solo practitioners, but let's say you were. Is there like a club in Miami they should absolutely go to? Like here, there are some communities, some associations, and they go there and they're waiting for work, they're networking. I like the Mos Eisley example, as John explained. Are there lots of US operators just milling around a particular part of Miami waiting for the call? Who has the visa for X country, or who has the language skills? Or is it very much like a transitory point and no one is milling around waiting for work?
Yeah, no. So first of all, you do have several events happening not only in Miami but in Florida in general. You have have a pretty important conference right now going on as we speak. GSX, right? In Orlando.
No, but I mean a club, like someone's looking for work. Are they hanging around, like living by the beach, or are they living by the airport, or is no one actually living in Miami?
No, people. Obviously, people live in Miami. You have very, very nice and very good companies there that operate internationally. I'm not going to start naming them because it's not going to be fair with the ones that I don't name. But you have. And we both know some folks that are very well known and they're very professional. And you start by Googling who's there in the space and making those phone calls. And they'll be happy to help.
So, Joe, what are the biggest threats that we should be looking out for if we're operating? I know there's again, it's kind of generic and it's kind of a bit general, but
I would say to be very generalistic, again, I don't like being general, but one theme that you have to be very careful with in Latin America is corruption, right? And that means, again, that, some bad guy can go in and pay a few dollars to someone for information about you and your principal. They can, all sorts of things, right? They can create a lot of trouble with that because of the ability of bribing and giving a few dollars here and there. In some places, you can even bribe the police, and they can have the police giving you a hard time as a distraction to give you an idea, right? So I think corruption is something to keep in mind. It has a flip side as well, and I'm not, encouraging anyone to do anything that is illegal. But in some of these places, you better have your ID and your driver's license, and you better have a few dollar bills or 20s or 50s that you can, if needed, hand around to someone to let you go and not create a whole scene and
yeah, well, this is what comes into the
time, right?
Plan B and Plan C, right?
Correct, exactly. Understand also in most of these countries, remember there's poverty in a lot of these countries, so really, really important to understand where it is that you are moving, because you can't say, if you take Colombia, for example, or if you take Brazil or Mexico, right? You can't say the whole country is very unsafe. That's just not going to give you anything. understand in the city that you're moving, what neighborhoods are red zones, don't even get near there. What neighborhoods are okay, and understand what type of, again, what's the modus operandi, what's happening there. Is it just, I can give you, there's a ton of examples right now. We have a few of those delivery companies in some of these Latin American countries that are all over the place in motorcycles, right? They are like a plague, and it's great because it's given jobs to a lot of people, but at the same time, it's very distracting. It's, has a whole bunch of challenges. So now it's not that uncommon to see people getting near to your vehicle in a motorcycle. So is it one person? Is it two people? Then you start getting, see what I'm saying? Yep. So then, depending on, again, who you're with, where you're going, et cetera, then it may make all the sense, if you can, to get a, level 3+ armored car, for example, while you're there, right? But again, you can just, what is the scenario? Who are you protecting? Protection from what? Where are you at? What's happening there? How do I mitigate that? So in general terms, I think those cover a lot of LatAm, especially the corruption is, I think, really, really bad, and something to, if you're not used to what it can do, something to consider before you go there. But then again, each of the countries, you have to go in and see what's happening, what's the trend in that specific country.
So what about you, Joe? Obviously, you've been there for quite a long time. What is it that you enjoy most about this operating environment? What keeps you there?
What keeps me in LatAm or in security?
Oh, yeah, in the region, operating in this region in particular. I mean, obviously, you've built a wealth of knowledge, and that's not something you just want to trade in. But I get the sense that there's more passion there than just that.
Yeah, well, again, I'm Colombian originally, right? So I really like the Latin American culture, the colors, the food, right? The music. It's a really nice place to be in, and so it's very, very nice for me to come and work here a lot. So, and then also understanding that mindset of the culture of the Mexican or the Brazilian or the Latin American in general, if there's such a thing, is something that you develop with time. Like if you like wines, then you can tell one wine from the other, and same thing with people in a certain way, right after you hit a certain age. And so I enjoy the Latin Americans a lot. Actually enjoy people a lot. So I'm one of those guys who can gladly stay for 5 hours in an airport having a coffee and just watching people, right? Well, maybe not 5 hours, but maybe 40 minutes, right? People are interesting, and again, once you start understanding each of those geographies, what happens there, you start, seeing the pros and the cons of each of these places, and at the same time, you also get a little sense of where you live. For example, for those living in the U.S., how lucky we are to live in the U.S. with certain things, and how many luxuries we have, and how many things we have that are not needed at all. It gives you a lot of food for thought. So it's always enriching and always interesting. But I guess you could also say that about travel to Europe or to Asia or to any other region for that sake, right? I just like travel, and I like, meeting different people. And so when you blend that with the passion for security and for keeping people safe, it's been a good mix for me so far, fortunately.
Perfect. Well, Joe, this is a fantastic tour de force. Obviously, LatAm as a region, it's enormous. Does it actually exist, or is it even scratching the surface? I don't know, but it's whetted my appetite, and I hope our listeners to consider working or at least visiting. And that Miami LatAm corridor, it is a curious one. I want to explore it more, but I feel I've got to do it on the ground, perhaps at the Fontaine Bleu Hotel or something like that. But it's a pleasure having you.
Now you're talking.
Yeah. Joe, thanks ever so much for coming on. This is intriguing, and I feel it's going to leave everyone wanting more. From John and myself, thank you very much for being on the Circuit Magazine podcast.
Thank you, guys. A pleasure, and hope to see you soon in Miami or in LatAm.
Well, I don't know about you, Sean, but I might term this interview OPSEC in Latin America, because of course you have to keep a lot of things on the low. As Joe said, there is corruption to contend with, and you need to really be careful which trusted partners you're using and when and how, but that Miami corridor is still valuable. I know it's quite broad, but what did you think? Is there something we can take away?
Yeah, no, I did like listening to Joe, and you're right, it was broad, but I think the takeaway is, wherever you're going, whether it be Miami or any country, you do have to utilise local partners, and do some research before you take these companies on, so you know who you're dealing with, what they provide, and vet who you're using. Are they a trusted provider? And do some research. Look at who you're using, but yeah, local national companies, wherever you're going, you need to utilise that information and ground knowledge from people in that space, for sure.
Indeed, and it's really good to have Joe on. I know Joe from initially the IPSB event in Vegas. I hope he'll be there as well this December. But Joe also is connected to a lot of other friends of the industry, some of which, in fact, we know and have interviewed, but for OPSEC purposes, let's not mention it. But Latin America, I think it must be a place that we are willing to go to in this post-drawdown age. Yes, the language will be important, but I just get the feeling there's gonna be more opportunities. And for the uninitiated, apparently that's my catchphrase, the uninitiated, I think positioning yourself in Miami might be a good way of being ready for these opportunities, much like some of the networks here in London are good for capitalizing on that. But I must note, we are still at the International Security Expo here in London, Olympia. It's really a good vibe going on. It's lovely to have everyone still here. I think, Sean, you said before it was actually nicer to go and network than to take a stand. What are the sorts of conversations you've been having? Can you bring them to life? Are people talking about happy endeavours, or are they, what are they saying?
I mean, it was great, viewing all of the different stands and the new technologies that's available. Technology moves on so fast. Certainly in the security industry, there's so much out there to go. If you're there looking, with a security budget and money to spend, you can certainly spend it at these events. You can invest your money, and you can go next year, and you see, God, this brand new technologies come out, and it's hard to keep pace. It's like your Apple devices. Every year you get iPhone 12, 13, the 14. So you have to keep up to speed. If you're head of security for a high net worth individual, you need to go to these events to see what is out there. So when your principal asks you, you can answer the question. You have the knowledge of what is out there. What's the latest tech? What can you provide? And fill up that contact book with these companies and join the dots. Be the middleman. Be the provider. Your principal wants something, you should be able to provide it, and going to these events can help you do that.
And what about some of the talks? Because I know our good friend Ivor Terrett was speaking yesterday. I think I didn't quite get there in time because I was on my way to our event, but he was talking convergence. Do you know any more about Ivor's talk?
I love seeing Ivor. Every time he speaks, he captivates the audience. He's a great, another one of your phrases, friend of the industry, and friend of the magazine. I think he was talking on convergence of cybersecurity and the physical side of security, and it's been spoken about for a lot of years. But I think what Ivor was trying to say is, now's the time to, the physical expert, the cyber expert, they should be working together. And lots of people say they do it, and then it stops there. If there's you're in a football stadium and there's a physical event that happens, I think what I was trying to say, the cyber guys, they don't find out about it. Or if there's something happens cyber, maybe the physical guys don't find out about it. I think he's talking more in tune that these guys should be working together, and maybe someone sat above them, maybe a director of security, ensuring both disciplines work together hand in hand. I missed the talk. I know what it was about. Yeah, I think Ivor here is hugely knowledgeable, and I'm sure a lot of people took away a lot of great things from it.
Absolutely, and we're going to have to invite Ivor on. We can't play that card too often, so I want to make sure that we've got a really nice interview set up for Ivor. So Ivor, if you're listening, we're going to invite you, of course. But yes, today was great with Joe, and great to see so many of the BBA members. You know, I think some who are very active on the app, I had only known them from the app, so that was good, meeting them in person. We'll have more meetups, we'll have more virtual events that are topic based, but yeah, we're still looking for contributors, aren't we, Sean?
We're looking for contributors to the magazine and the podcast as well. You know, if you have something good to talk about, which is relevant to people in our industry, which people would like to hear about, read about, please get in touch.
Fantastic. Well, keep subscribing. Don't just be an invisible listener. Okay, if for obsec reasons you have to be, but please subscribe to the podcast, because it means that we know that our community is enlarging and we know what to give to you. So please do that. Please do keep subscribing and being active in the BBA Connect app and the Number Protector app. We know that Elijah is doing some amazing things on that app as well. But yeah, it's great to be here meeting in person. I think yesterday was the first time a lot of us had met up in physically in a while, but it didn't feel that weird, did it? Because we've actually spoken so much over these last 18 months, maybe more than when we were actually not in this pandemic.
Yeah, no, for sure. As we spoke about before, it's been great to see businesses down test and adjust and change the model during COVID, where they've delivered training through Zoom or whatever they've done remotely. But I don't think you can beat that face-to-face networking, meeting with people, grabbing a coffee or a beer maybe after an event, and yeah, it's great that the world's open back up.
I love it, and maybe next time in Miami, as per the topic of today's podcast.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, everyone likes to have an event in Miami. Why not? So answers on a postcard if you're going to host us, or if we have to rent out one of those swanky beachside things. I don't know. I'm dreaming, but you know what? It could be possible. So let's watch this space. Well, for Sean and myself, thank you very much to Joe Gehr, and it is a tricky subject to cover in just one episode, but I hope it's given you a flavour of who to approach and how to use that Miami LatAm corridor a little bit more going forward. This has been another fantastic but live and in-person edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast, at least Sean and myself here today, and we look forward to seeing you in person or online very, very soon.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.